Hello, and welcome to the February edition of the Stanford Business Webinar Series. Today, we're talking about perfect match, using economics to find the right person, project, or job. My name is Barbara Buell, and I'll be your moderator today. To ask questions during the webinar, please click on the button near the bottom of your player window. You can also maximize or swap the video window and the slide window by using the small buttons in the upper right of each window. And finally, we will be live tweeting and monitoring the hashtag EconMatch throughout the webinar. You can post questions using Twitter as well. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Professor Paul Oyer. Paul is the Fred Merrill Professor of Economics here at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. He's also a research associate with the National Bureau of Economics and the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Labor Economics. His research interests have long focused on labor economics, personnel economics, incentives, and matching firms and workers. In addition to that, last year he published 2 books. One was called Everything I Ever Needed to Know About Economics, I Learned from Online Dating, and is an entertaining and non-technical explanation of key ideas in microeconomics using examples from online dating, as well as labor markets and many product markets. If you haven't already had the chance to read his other book, Roadside MBA, please visit the multimedia website for Roadside MBA. The link is listed in the slide window, and we'll post it to Twitter, again, using today's hashtag EconMatch. You can follow Paul on Twitter using the handle @PaulOyer. So thanks, Paul, for being here today to share this timely information, it being Valentine's Day on Saturday. Your work has been cited in a number of periodicals, as well as general press, like the Wall Street Journal. And I understand you're going to be on PBS Thursday evening on a segment called The Economics of Love. So tell us a little bit about why you wrote the book in the way that you did and focusing on online dating.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for having me, Barbara, and thanks for that very kind introduction. So I wrote the book. I had no intentions of writing this book. I was working on the Roadside MBA when this all started, and I basically, several years ago, I went back on the dating market for the first time in 20 years. And there had been 2 big changes in those intervening 20 years. One was in my own life, I'd become an economist. So I'd gone from doing some other job to go through graduate school to become a faculty member and so forth. And the other big change in the world was the rise of the internet. So those 2 things converge in an important way. When I went back on the dating market, I used online dating because the internet had risen and so forth. And I immediately saw, given my new perspective as an economist, that this was a market like any other. And I became kind of fascinated with that. And there were 2 things that really drew my attention to it and ended up making me think it was worthy of a book. One of them was, as a labor economist, the economics behind matching people to jobs is very similar to the economics that matches people to each other in their relationships. And then the second thing I liked about looking at this from the perspective of looking at dating from the perspective of economics, was that no money changes hands, or very little money changes hands. And so I think most people think of economics as the study of money, when in fact it's not. It's the study of scarce resources, as we'll talk about. And so finding an opportunity to explain some key economics and key ideas in microeconomics without any money involved, I thought was a very, very nice opportunity to teach people some of the things that interest me so much, at least. So what I'm going to do today is go through a few of those key ideas. And I'll talk about online dating, of course, because it's Valentine's Day, and that's the example I use in the book to introduce each idea. But as I do in the book, I'll stray to other topics, especially the job market, but also carpet making, car insurance, and other examples you may never have thought of trying to align with online dating before. And in fact, what I'm going to do is try to get through, and we'll see if we make it through all of this, try to get through this in 4 stages. So rather than focus on the economics, well, I'm going to focus on the economics, but I'm going to take you through it in the stages that a relationship develops. And each of these 4 ideas won somebody a Nobel Prize in economics. And in at least 3 of those cases, we know that the person who won that Nobel Prize has spoken about how their economic model applies to the dating or significant other markets. So the 4 stages I want to think about are: first, choosing the market you go into; Then thinking about creating your profile, and again, we can draw parallels to the job market each time. So creating your profile would be creating your LinkedIn profile or writing your resume or something like that, writing your cover letters. The third stage will be the first date, so getting to know each other. And then the final stage is settling down, knowing when you've found the person you should settle down with and when that person has found you as well. So let's take that in those 4 stages. And basically, stage 1 is what market should I look in when I'm either in the labor market or we'll start in the dating market? What dating site should I go to? And piece of advice number 1 is very simple and intuitive. It's go big. Size matters in markets. Okay, so everything else equal, bigger markets are better. A lot of you who went to the GSB here have been through enough finance classes that you understand that liquid financial markets are good. They create price competition. There's more aggregation of information so that we get a more efficient allocation of resources and so forth. Now, this idea of going big and that thick liquid markets are good, that's an important idea, and it's kind of straightforward, but the details of it can be very hard. And working out how to get those financial markets to be liquid and some other markets that we're going to talk about to be liquid, that's what led to a Nobel Prize for Al Roth here at Stanford. So that's the way in which this is a Nobel Prize winning idea. Now, this exact same principle of big markets being better, that applies in the dating and the labor market as well, but for a very different reason. And so the difference between a financial market and the dating market, well, there are so many differences, of course, but the big difference to think about is each stock in one company, a company will have millions of shares, and each one of those shares is identical. Well, it's in the market for a job or for a life partner, each good is differentiated. There are no perfect substitutes. So no 2 jobs or no 2 life partners are the same. So why do we want thick markets? Not so we get this price competition, but because we want to get better matches. The more we bring more people into the same market, the better the match will be between. So we don't want just any old match. We want the best possible match, or at least the best possible subject to certain constraints. So let me explain that metaphorically. So think of a boardwalk. And think of a long boardwalk, and along this boardwalk, you're in the market for a significant other. And think along the boardwalk is every possible person who could potentially become your significant other. And along the boardwalk is stratified so that in the middle are the people who are really good fits for you. If there were such thing as the perfect person for you, which we're going to get to later, that I don't really think you should ever think in those terms, but if there were, that person would be right in the middle of the boardwalk. And at the opposite extremes at one end of the boardwalk would be people who are really bad fits for you for one reason. At the other end, there are those who are really bad fits for you for another reason. So it's a little bit like Goldilocks. At one end, people are too big. At the other end, they're too small. And in the middle, everybody is just right. So look at these 2 boardwalks in the slide. Which one would you rather be on looking for your next significant other? Would you rather be looking on the left, which metaphorically is the equivalent of Match.com or OkCupid or some other very big online dating site? Or would you rather be looking at the one on the right, which is, a singles bar or something where there are a few people, but, the odds that any one of them is a very good fit for you are very small? Or you could also think of it as, again, getting outside the dating market, think of the left boardwalk as being Monster.com with all the jobs that are available on Monster.com. And on the right boardwalk, we have the Palo Alto Weekly Classifieds with a few potential job ads, but not much. Okay? And for one final way of thinking about this, you can think of the left as the MLS system for houses, the multiple listing service, which has all the houses on the market at any given time. And on the right slide, that's the listings your agent happens to be trying to sell right now, and your agent, he or she, wants to match both sides of that. And you'd rather look at the whole market, and that agent might want to focus you on a particular part of it.
Paul, isn't this a little bit like going to the grocery store and seeing 25 different brands of vinegar lined up? I mean, how do you filter through the variegated choice that's out there?
Right. So that's a really great question, because I'm making it sound like economists believe choice is good. And choice generally is good, but too much choice can be overwhelming. So if you go to the Santa Monica Pier, which was the boardwalk on the left that's so full of people, if you really had all those people to filter through, that would be an unenviable task that you could never really do. So what's important is, if online dating were just about randomly being matched to the thousands of people on a site, then maybe the idea of thick markets wouldn't apply so well, because you'd be so overwhelmed it wouldn't be operable. So what's incumbent upon both the job boards and the online dating sites is to take that whole boardwalk full of the thousands and thousands of people they have in their database and come up with appropriate algorithms to narrow it down so that you're only looking at people who are close to you on the boardwalk. That's where, and I think that's a big business opportunity going forward for both LinkedIn and other job sites and for online dating sites, to figure out, how do I show you the slice of the boardwalk that's most appropriate? Now, another way to think about narrowing that down is to think about all these niche sites out there. So there are a lot of niche sites, niche dating sites, all kinds of niche dating sites you can't imagine. One that's been very successful is farmersonly.com, but there are a number of others. There's veggiedate.com, there's tennisdate.com. And you might think that's an opportunity to have the best of both worlds, right? Because you can pick the people who have a similar set of interests with you, and hopefully if all those people go to this dating site, you would have a thick market of more appropriate matches. And that can work, and we'll talk about cases where it can, but it's only going to work, I think, if there are a lot of people in that niche, and if not being in that niche is a deal breaker. So let me give you some examples of niche sites that I think are going to do well and some that I'm a little less optimistic about. Okay, so for example, these sites exist. YouMustLoveDogsDating.com. Now that sounds like a good site for me. I have a dog. I love my dog. It's very important to me that my partner at least tolerate the dog, and my girlfriend has a dog, so you might think that would have been a good place for us to meet. But it wasn't. Why? Because though we both like dogs, that wasn't a deal breaker for us. It was, most of the people near me on the boardwalk, many of them may have liked dogs, but it could be the case that a lot of them didn't. And by the same token, there were people all along the boardwalk who loved dogs, and for whom I would have been a very bad match. Similarly, glutenfreedating.com is a site that's trying to match people with similar dietary interests. And I think that's a nice idea, and I don't happen to be gluten-free, so maybe I just don't have the proper appreciation for the value of a gluten-free dating site. But I think that restricts the boardwalk a little bit too much. So if I can move to the board here for a second, I have drawn the boardwalk. And think about this boardwalk as being the left boardwalk on your slides, the Santa Monica Pier that's very full of potential mates for you. And think about, you want to find, ideally, a website would cut everybody in this blue area down for you. So those would be the people the site would show you. They're really good fits for you, and that's the type of person you want. So if you go to a site such as glutenfree.com or mustlovedogsdating.com, I think what you would find is you're going to get a selection of people that are kind of like this. That is, there are a lot of people who don't like dogs, even if you do, who are not very good fits for you. And there are a lot of people who love dogs who are not good fit. A lot of people who love dogs who are not good fits for you, and a lot of people who would be good fits for you who don't love dogs. So these sites are going to have problems, because if you look, all that's left in this market is the few red dots that's both within the blue lines and within the black circle. And that becomes a thin market. I think these sites are not that likely to be successful because they eliminate many people who are close to you on the boardwalk, as you can see on my little diagram here, hopefully. Now, there are other niche sites that have been successful, and I think they're going to continue to be successful. And why is that? Well, let's take as an example christianmingle.com or ourtime.com. Christian Mingle is a site where Christian people meet each other, and I think it's been and will continue to be successful. Why? Because what happens on Christian Mingle is being Christian is a deal breaker. It's very important. It's the main deciding factor for a lot of people, not obviously for everybody. And I think that the Mormon sites have had similar success and so forth. And so as a result, the people on Christian Mingle, if you're on Christian Mingle, are within this, more in that circle. So as a result, there's a lot of people who are good fits for you, and you're not, and by limiting yourself to other people who are interested in that site, you're not getting rid of a lot of people who would be good fits. So I think these sites are more likely to be successful because almost everyone who's close to you on the boardwalk would consider joining these sites. OurTime.com is the other example I'm giving there. That's a site for people over a certain age. And I believe I now fit into, I could go on to that. I believe I'm now aged into that site, although I've never used it. And it's been successful, again, because a lot of people want to limit themselves to other people of their own age. So coming back to the labor market for a second, Monster.com is really great for a lot of people because it's that big boardwalk full of people, and that's wonderful. But occasionally you'll find a specialized site that's successful as a job board. I went and interviewed a company down in Florida called College Frog that's been successful along these lines. What they do is they match new accountants coming out of school to firms that need to hire new accountants coming out of school. And so they have more, the site is a little more specialized. It fits a certain need that, and is able to set itself up in ways that Monster can't to address that particular niche. And again, it's because everybody who's coming out of an accounting program, or at least most people, are interested in this one job aspect, and those employers are able to go to that one source. So it's been very successful as a specialized or niche site. But everything else equal, I would recommend not Monster.com or LinkedIn as a means of getting your job network going. There's a couple of other ideas on this slide, which I'm gonna just glance over, but I'm just going to point out that career-wise, what this means is if you want a job that fits your particular interests best, you want to go where the market is thick for that. So as an example, if you're an engineer, you're more likely to find a job that fits your needs in the greater Silicon Valley area than in, say, Kansas City. Kansas City has a lot of great engineering opportunities out there, and it's about the same size as San Jose, but because the market's not as oriented towards technology, you're less likely to find a job that's close to you on the boardwalk in terms of exactly what you're looking for. So I'm gonna move on. I'll just quickly point out, since we have the slides up here, that the idea of a thick market applies well beyond just dating and the job market. So for example, where would you rather buy a pair of jeans? Would you rather go to the Mall of America or a small town in Oklahoma? Well, of course you'd rather go to the Mall of America because you may not want to actually go there, but you would rather have the choice of jeans you would have there because the market for jeans is very thick there. There's many different options for you, whereas if you go to a small town, that's not the case. So very simple idea. You'd rather go to a big shopping place than a small one. Now, if you take that, that's fine for malls and all sorts of goods like that. More specific goods also have developed thick markets in funny ways over the years. This is a picture of the Bowery in Lower Manhattan. And that used to be called well, it still is, it's the lighting district in Lower Manhattan. Store after store is full of lights, and people go down there and shop for lights because they know it's a thick market. The retailers set up there, the shoppers go there knowing they can buy lights and so forth. Now, this is a case where a thick market developed because the buyers and sellers found each other and they had incentives to go there and trade and so forth. Now, the market, the lighting district hasn't done as well in recent years, and that's because the thick market was able to move to the internet. So instead of going to Lower Manhattan to see all my options in lighting, I can now do that over the internet instead. Another example of a thick market developing sort of as a historical accident is Dalton, Georgia, which is the carpet manufacturing of the world. And until recently, about 90% of the world's carpeting was made there. Now, again, why is this carpeting all made in one place? Why is the market for carpeting so thick in this one place? And the answer is that when wall-to-wall carpeting first became feasible from a manufacturing point of view, there was a woman in Dalton, Georgia, who ran a big quilted bedding company. And the technology involved in designing quilts the way she designed them was very similar to the technology for wall-to-wall carpeting. So when the first carpet manufacturers came in, they settled in Dalton so they could take advantage of the tradespeople and the well-trained workers that she had already provided through her quilting business. And then over time, if people wanted to work in those trades, they would move to Dalton. So then if somebody wanted to set up another manufacturing firm, it made sense to set it up in Dalton. It's very much similar to the idea around which Silicon Valley developed, where Stanford begot HP and other startups, which then made engineers want to move to Silicon Valley, which then made other companies want to move here and hire those engineers and so forth. So thick markets are very important in love, in the job market, and in various trades as well. So I'm going to leave that at that and push on to stage 2 of your relationship, of a relationship, and that is presenting yourself. So if you go on an online dating site, what you'll see is people have a lot of information on there. And if you look at people's resumes, there's a lot of information there. But of course, not all relevant information is there. So what happens is readers fill in details. When I look at somebody's online profile, I fill in details. And so as a result, if you don't specifically say certain things, people will make assumptions when they see things on your online dating profile or on your resume. So for example, if you're separated rather than widowed or divorced or single, people will make certain assumptions. I'll come back to that in a second. What if you say on your online dating profile, you really love to go out and have a good time? That sounds like an innocuous thing to say, but people might fill in the details, oh, that guy's not serious about a relationship, or that guy drinks too much, or something like that. What if you say you enjoy NASCAR? Certain people will make disparaging assumptions about you based on that, or at least they will in certain parts of the country. In other parts of the country, they'll probably think that's great. And finally, what if somebody has a way of knowing that you've been on that dating site for a long time? They're going to naturally wonder, what's wrong with this guy? Why is he not able to find a relationship? Okay, so basically, as a result, hidden information can be very problematic in various markets. And this, again, is an idea that led to what we call a lemons problem. If people see something out there and have a reason to think that that person is a lemon, or in the case of the original economic model, which was written by George Akerlof, and this is what won him a Nobel Prize, he described all this about hidden information in the context of used cars. If I'm selling my car, I might have a great car, but then would I be willing to sell it? I might, but then if everybody sees that, if there are a lot of people who have crummy used cars and they're selling those, then I'm going to not get a very good price if I have a good car, and the market breaks down. Hidden information breaks the market down. So let me give you an example of that from my own experiences online dating. So when I initially went back on the market, I was separated. I wasn't divorced, and obviously I'd been married. So it turns out, and I was kind of naive about this, I just kind of said, I'm separated and I'm looking for a new relationship. Well, women can't tell the difference between separated men, and it turns out separated men come in several varieties. There were people, and I like to think I fell into this category, others might disagree, that I was back on the market and I was ready to enter a new relationship, and everything was good. But there are a lot of separated men who are really bitter and messed up by their recent breakup of their marriage. And there are other separated men, frankly, who haven't quite made up their mind, and they may end up going back to their wives. So women, not being able to tell the difference, they do what an economist would call statistically discriminate. They say, this guy who's separated might be earnest, but he also could be a lemon. And so, you know what? I'm going to stay away from that. And, this wasn't that big of a problem. Obviously, eventually, if you're separated, eventually you become divorced and this problem goes away. But what's interesting about this is it's statistical discrimination rather than discrimination, because it's not that women have any animus towards separated men. It's just that they can't tell the difference between the different types of separated men. So that's why it's statistical. They see an association between separated and some of these other traits, and statistically they say that he's more likely to be an emotional wreck, and so I'm going to stay away from that. So that's a pretty innocuous example. I quickly recovered from it because, time passes and fixes that problem. But there are a lot of other people for whom statistical discrimination is a much bigger problem, and I'm just going to quickly mention two examples, one where we tolerate statistical discrimination and one where we don't. car insurance is a great example. My son is a pretty good, pretty safe driver. There's some question about that, but let's just take that as a given. And he's 20 years old, and his car insurance rates are very high. Why? Because a lot of 20-year-old men are really crazy drivers. And so car insurance companies see you have a 20-year-old male in the household, and they drive your insurance rates up because they say 20-year-old men on average are a greater risk, and they can't tell the high risk from the low risk versions, and they're allowed to price based on that. So that's a case where we tolerate statistical discrimination because we feel like, what else are you going to do about it? How else would the insurance market clear? And people like my son or me who pays the car insurance, we're out of luck because we have to pay for this risk that we shouldn't, in all fairness, have to bear, but that's the way it works. And, as a society, we tolerate that form of statistical discrimination. Another form of statistical discrimination that's out there that we don't tolerate is a lot of firms would be, given the choice, reluctant to hire young women. So suppose you came out of the Stanford GSB and you're a 28-year-old woman, maybe you're recently married even. Well, a firm that's very rational about it would stop and say, okay, she's a great candidate, but statistically, she's more likely to take some time out of the labor force over the next 5 to 10 years when we were hoping for relatively high productivity from this person. And they might show a little reluctance. Now, that's very unfair to the women out there, especially the ones who don't plan to take any time out, and it's problematic, but we as a society have decided that form of statistical discrimination is not something we're going to tolerate. And why is that? Well, there's some fairness issues, of course, but there's also some efficiency issues we need to think about. And I won't get into these in great detail, but of course, if we allowed firms to statistically discriminate against women based on their age, that would change the incentives for women to even go to business school or college to begin with in ways that we certainly don't want to discourage them from. So from a civil rights perspective, we've gotten around that issue.
Paul, we've got a couple of questions that have come in from the audience, specifically on this idea of profiles and data. People are asking, what would I put on my LinkedIn profile or some other business platform? What is too much information, and what is specific enough to have an employer interested in me for my skill set?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's hard to say, of course, in a given context. If somebody wants to send in their LinkedIn profile, we can go over it in an individual context. But I think a couple of rules to remember are, for both dating and LinkedIn profiles, the first thing I recommend is make sure somebody who doesn't know you that well looks over your profile and tells you what they think, and more specifically, what assumptions they're making about the things you haven't said. So if you look at somebody's LinkedIn profile and you say, oh, this, it looks like the person didn't take off on a certain trajectory over a certain period of time, you don't always know that. You have an excuse in your mind for why things happen. But get somebody to help you see what information is not on your profile that you need to explain for and beware of. I mean, some very simple examples, and these are pretty generic but important and simple examples are leaving any gaps on your LinkedIn profile. People will just assume you took time off or you were unemployed and couldn't find a job or something like that. So you want to try to avoid people making negative assumptions about what is on your resume in the case of LinkedIn or what's on your profile in the case of the dating situation. People, a really important example of this idea of statistical discrimination is people who are unemployed for a while. When someone looks at their resume, there's a built-in assumption that they're unemployed because they weren't that good, or other employers have looked at them and passed on them or something like that. And so unemployment can become because of statistical discrimination, can become a self-sustaining state. And you want to, try to avoid that. And once you've been in it, you have to be very careful about how you explain away those periods on your resume. So let me move on to the third stage, which is the first date. So now you've found somebody and you like each other's profiles and you've gotten past the fact that the person is separated or likes NASCAR or whatever it is, and you've agreed to meet in person. Well, before we get to that, one more thing about people's people's profiles is lying is rampant on dating sites. I hate to burst anybody's bubble out there, but if you look at somebody's profile, it's full of, on average, a lot of them are full of exaggerations or outright lies. So I'm 51 years old. I'm not currently online dating, but if I were, I would, of course, I'm a Stanford GSB professor, so of course I'd be completely honest, but somebody who's 51 years old is likely to say they're 49 on a dating site so that they're not screened out by people who don't want to date people over 50. That's one example. You know, I've seen many examples of people who say they're athletic and toned in their description of their body type, and that's not quite a fair assessment of what they look like. What I said on my own profile and how well it met the expectations of the people I dated, I will leave to them to tell you. But all I can tell you is, from an economics perspective, much of this is rational. And it's the same with resumes. People pad their resumes, and similarly, that's rational. Now, it's terrible. It's a big problem. A lot of people stay away from online dating because they're just sick of the lies and the misconceptions and so forth. You can't tell too big a lie, of course, because if you do, you'll be caught the first time you meet somebody. But you can tell little lies about income or height or something like that. So rationally, people are going to lie, and this leads to two problems. It just screws up the market for all of us, even those of us who are perfectly honest. For one thing, because people lie, those people who look at resumes and at dating profiles discount what other people say. So if your profile says you're athletic and toned, I'm going to assume you might be, but you might not be, and so forth. Or if you say you're 51, if you say you're 47, I'm going to be a little skeptical that that's your true age. The other thing is, because so many people are lying, and not everybody is lying, forgive me if I said that, because a lot of people are lying, that puts a lot of pressure on other people to lie, because if they don't, they're going to have their resumes or their dating profiles discounted anyway. So as a result, we have this kind of lousy equilibrium on dating sites, and to some degree on job profiles as well, where people tend to exaggerate or lie a little bit. So how do we get around this? Well, option number one is verification. And some markets where there's a natural tendency towards some level of lying, verification works pretty well. In the case of jobs, references aren't perfect, but they get you a little bit towards verification of what you've said. Or these LinkedIn references and endorsements and all that, that's moving a little bit in that direction. I don't think they've really nailed that yet, but it's a step in the right direction. So from an online dating perspective, verification is really not gotten very far at all. There are a couple of sites in some foreign countries that have gone ahead and asked people to document their height, their age, their income, etc., using tax returns, driver's licenses, things like that. So we can do some level of verification, but it's very costly, and it kind of changes the nature of the business somewhat. Another thing you can do is, eBay has been very successful with making people feel safe about the purchases they make by using reviews. So if you sell stuff or buy stuff on eBay, over time you get reviewed, and eventually people begin to trust you because they see 47 other people have bought Ninja Warrior dolls from you, and they feel like, okay, the Ninja Warrior doll you're going to sell them is as described. Now, we can't really do that. That's not been done so much in the dating world. And there's a couple of good reasons for that. Breakups lead people to be very emotional, and we don't necessarily want people rating their ex-boyfriends and ex-girlfriends. Although there is a site called onlulu.com in the US where women review men just like they would on eBay, and they talk about their shortcomings and things like that. But it's very unusual, and it's a small part of the overall market. So how else can you verify what you say? Well, this comes back to the third Nobel Prize-winning idea of the day, and this idea is attributed to Mike Spence, who used to be the dean here at the GSB. And basically what you want to do is you want to figure out a way to signal. So what does signaling mean? It means, how can I figure out a way to separate myself from the fakers? So I have some attribute, and I want to signal to an employer or to a woman that I have that attribute. But everybody else goes ahead and says they have that attribute too, So how can I make it credible? How can I make the cheap talk that I have that attribute credible? So in order to do that, you have to come up with some form of signaling, some means of signaling you are actually qualified in a way that you say you are. And that signal has to be correlated with whether or not you're really qualified. And I'll come back to a couple of examples. And then the second thing is it has to be costly for me to signal. I kind of have to waste some time and effort in order to signal. Okay, but it has to also be less costly for the people who are truly qualified. So let me quickly run you through the idea as Mike Spence saw it, and then we'll talk about it in the dating context. So in Spence's example of signaling was education. Now, I don't think he really believed this. Let's hope not, since he was the dean here at the GSB and also a very, very productive teacher and scholar at Harvard and at Stanford over his career. But the idea in Spence's model was, just assume you learn absolutely nothing in school. You just go to Stanford GSB so that we can make you do economics and statistics and negotiations classes, and none of those are going to be of any value to you whatsoever. But suppose, we don't believe this, by the way, I just want to reiterate that. Suppose that getting through school is difficult in a way that those who can get through our program are also qualified for good jobs. Well, then you'd have a nice equilibrium where by going to Stanford Business School, you could signal to the outside world, I'm qualified for your job. And even though it's 2 years that are kind of wasted by going to the Stanford Business School, you would at least be separating yourself and employers know you're good. And then what happens is the students who wouldn't be good here and are not qualified for jobs, they don't even bother applying or going to a business school or a Stanford Business School because they know, hey, I'm not going to get through, so why waste my time and so forth. So that signal has two values. It's costly because I have to spend 2 years, and it's valuable because it separates me from the fakers who say they're qualified for the job. So how does that apply to dating? So let me give you just 2 quick examples of how this applies to dating. If I say to you, a lot of men will send women messages on dating sites that say, I would like to meet you. In fact, there's now a cottage industry of men who subcontract this out. I'm not making this up. You can hire somebody to do your online dating for you, to send the messages and set up meetings for you. Okay, so if you're a woman, you would actually like to know that the person who is contacting you and says, hey, I'd love to meet you, really means it. So how would you do that? Well, one way you can do that is you can spend a lot of time personalizing your message. So if I send a message that says, hey, you look cute, I'd like to meet you, I can send that to anybody. But if I send one that says, hey, I looked at your profile, that picture of you in Hawaii, I remember I went to that place, that's great. I think it's really cool that you like to watch Downton Abbey. I'm old and boring too, and I watch that show too. I do, so I'm allowed to make fun of that. And if you say these things, then the woman who reads that says, oh, this guy put a little thought into this. I've wasted time, as it were, that I could have used on sending messages to hundreds of or many women on this one profile, and I've therefore signaled to her, hey, I cared about you enough to spend the time on this, and you know that's only going to be useful if I'm actually interested in her. So she's clearly sees that I'm qualified. Now,
Paul, can I just interrupt for a minute? We're getting quite a few questions on LinkedIn and personal profiling in the business context. One viewer wanted to clarify something you said earlier about Monster.com
yep.
and thick markets. So were you trying to say that Monster.com is a thicker market than LinkedIn and therefore better? Or does LinkedIn give you more of an opportunity to talk about things that might signal people your qualifications and so forth? Could you talk about that comparison a bit?
Sorry, I didn't mean to suggest that one was thicker than the other. They're both thick markets. They're both very big markets. One of them specifically for job seekers, and the other one for people who have a job and or are job seeking. So they're very different markets, but they're both quite thick. They're both Santa Monica piers rather than that empty boardwalk.
But is there something different about them?
Yeah, I mean, so the way that I think the markets have evolved is, at least at the high end, the way to get a job, the way you'd prefer to get a job is through LinkedIn or some other reference. So it's always better to have a job when you're looking for a job. And some of that comes back to the signaling, comes back to the adverse selection idea. If you're unemployed looking for a job, that's problematic. What's nice about LinkedIn is it gives the employers an opportunity to say, hey, are you interested in a job? Whereas on Monster.com, the employer has to wait for you to show an interest in the job. And so that changes the dynamic a little bit. It's a little bit like, on a dating site, both sides have to get on the dating site before it can work. And that's the way Monster.com works. But on LinkedIn, all the people of one gender are kind of already there talking to each other and getting to know each other. And it's like the other people look in and say, hey, are you interested? Hey, are you interested? That would be a lousy way to run a dating site, but it's a good way to run a job market, or at least to give people an opportunity who may not be explicitly looking for jobs.
Another question that came in was this notion of distorted information. You seem to be saying that almost all information we may come in contact with is distorted in some way. Potentially. And so if you were an employer or recruiter on LinkedIn looking for someone, how do you filter, how do you assess what may or may not be distorted, or is that simply not possible?
Yeah, it's really hard. And so that's a very difficult question on the employer side. I think that's where LinkedIn is going to find that if they want to get people to really stick with them now that they've become the dominant workplace social network, I think they're going to have to figure out ways to try to get firms to feel more comfortable that what you say in your profile there is indeed accurate. So just as dating sites are, I think, going forward, the dating site or the workplace networking or job board site that can do a better job at low cost of verifying the information you put there, they're going to be successful. There's a business case to be made for that, but you have to do it at reasonable cost. It's very hard for LinkedIn to verify. If LinkedIn wanted to verify the information you put out there, they'd have to spend a lot of money, and the key to their business is that it's kind of self-sustaining. It's got this network effect. It's very fixed costs rather than marginal costs, and they want to stay away from that. So the company that can figure out from a technical point of view, how can I do more verification without adding to my labor costs, they're going to be very successful. They're going to make some money, and they're going to bring valuable product to employers and to online daters out there as well. Okay, so I'm gonna skip ahead here and just briefly touch on the idea that happened in this one online dating experiment. So one way I could signal is an online dating firm can help me signal, and one in Korea did that. They ran an experiment for a brief period of time where people were allowed to send up to 2 virtual roses over a short period of time. And those signaled to people, hey, I really do want to meet you. And they were very successful at getting people together. Now, that hasn't been taken up more broadly in the online dating world for various reasons because it can be gamed. But again, I think it's a good place to think about starting.
We have one more question,
yep,
if I
sure.
may.
Absolutely.
About linking people, employees, with projects. And I know you've also done work that we're not talking about specifically today on incentives. Are there ways that internally companies, employers can link people to projects they might be interested in other departments they may be unaware of?
Yeah, that's another business opportunity out there for some smart GSB grad out there. There's probably a product out there already I don't know about, but that sounds like a really good business opportunity, I would think. So I know a lot about law firms and consulting firms, and it seems to me that one thing they need to, and private equity firms would be the same way, where you have these recurring projects or deals or whatever it is, and you want to think about matching the right person to the right project based on skills, but also skills development and also the partners or whoever, the network of people they'd be working with. And so again, it's going to be context specific exactly how you do it. And I'm sure that if in order to be successful in those businesses I just mentioned, you have to be pretty good at it. But I bet there are ways to take the data these companies have and design algorithms to make them even more successful.
Do you think that's something we'll see coming out of HR departments in the future?
I think it's something we'll see coming out of aspiring businesses I think we'll see it. It'll work through the HR department. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, so I should probably move on because I don't want to skip. I don't want to give short shrift. There's a slide here about other examples of signaling. College applications and early decisions is one of my favorites, but I'm gonna move along now because I could go on talking all day about signaling, but I want to make sure I have time for the last topic, the last Nobel Prize-winning idea. And I have to get to this because it's the part where I take all the fun out of it, even though it's Valentine's Day week, and remind you that the perfect one, a lot of people are saying, I need the one. I need the person who's perfect for me. I need that perfect chemistry and all those things we look for in a relationship. Well, I'm going to burst your bubble and point out that the one just doesn't exist. And if that person's out there, you're unlikely to find them across the millions and millions of people. And when I think about this from an economics perspective, I want to think about when do you settle down? Well, at a very rational point of view, you want to settle down when the costs of searching for somebody better out there are starting to outweigh the benefits. So you keep searching as long as you think you can find somebody better and it's worth the extra trouble. Remember, economics is the study of scarce resources, not the study of money. When we think about searching for a job or searching for a life partner, the scarce resource is time. I don't have unlimited time to look at online profiles. So I've got to think about how do I balance the fact that I can do better if I keep searching for somebody who can make me happier against the costs of the fact that if I do spend that time, that would be great. Nothing beats finding the perfect soulmate for you, but I also have to walk the dog and I have to make my dinner and I have to watch Downton Abbey and so forth. So what do? In the end, people hate to say this, but in the end, you have to settle. It's true of jobs. It's true of significant others. You want to look for the best possible match subject to other constraints, keeping in mind that, hey, you got to get on with your life. And
do you think everyone should settle, Paul?
Well, everyone has to.
Where's the line?
Where's the line? I'm glad you asked that question. Can I go back to draw another question? The line varies. Okay, so there's two things that change the line over time. One is just your own age. So as I get older, if I'm on the dating market or I'm on the job market, either one, if I'm out looking for a new match, I should be a little less picky than if I'm just coming out of the GSB. Why? Because if I find just the right match, I have less time for that relationship. You know, jobs turn over and so forth, but if I find just the right job coming out of the GSB, I'm going to hold it for 40 or something years. Or if I find just the right significant other when I'm coming out of the GSB, I'm going to be with that person for 40 years. I should hold a really high bar before I settle for good enough at that stage of my life. But as you get older and older, you know, if you spend 6 more months looking for a significant other or a job, that's 6 months is not a trivial portion of the amount of time you would have with the right person. Coming back to the board, the other thing you have to keep in mind is the relative supply of men and women changes over time. So I'm going to draw a graph here. This is age, and this is the number of eligible, and obviously everything I've said up till now although I've often used the terminology suggesting that, everything I've said up till now is not specific to the heterosexual market. But this will be the one example where what I say is not necessarily as relevant in the same-sex market. So if you look at the number of eligible women over time, they're going to kind of go down like that, and then maybe even back up a little bit. Okay? This is the number of eligible. And then if you look at the number of eligible men, it's going to start at about the same level. And then, you know, it's going to be about the same. I'll make the men in red. It's going to be about the same level for a while. But then men die sooner. This is an important factor from a supply and demand point of view. So this is a simple simple function of supply and demand. So if you look at the board here, once you get to a certain age, there's a lot of eligible women for every eligible man. And so what does this mean? It means that as you age, you're going to be less picky no matter what for the reason I said before about the amount of time left over. But if we go back to the board for a second, you see, if you're, as you age, women, I hate to say this, but they should particularly be less picky as they get older because the opportunity set they have out there is much smaller. Men, you know, unfortunately, when you get to be my age and beyond, we start to be relatively low in supply compared with women. So I think that's an important factor in exactly how you settle, or exactly what should drive your decision to settle. Now, this exact idea of there being no perfect match for you and people spending time looking for a match, this is what won Dale Mortensen and Chris Pissarides the Nobel Prize, I think this was back in 2010. And they talked about the importance of what we as economists call frictions. So the frictions in the labor market would be things like the time spent looking for a job, the time spent interviewing, writing resumes, all that sort of stuff. The frictions in the dating market would be the time looking at online profiles, the time setting up your profile, the first dates that go nowhere. Those are friction, you know, kind of wasted resources until you find the right match. And as the Nobel Prize Committee said, when they gave these guys the prize, they said, focus on the last sentence, on such search markets, the demands of some buyers will not be met, while some sellers cannot sell as much as they would wish. So what you're going to have is simultaneously there will be both job vacancies and unemployment on the labor market. So there's a lot of more detail to it than this, but basically what Mortensen and Pissarides said is people spend so much time looking for jobs that inevitably some people are going to be unemployed as that process plays out. And it's all about sort of about whether your goals, whether you're setting too high a lofty, if you hold out too long, you're going to be unemployed longer. Well, the exact same logic applies to finding a life partner. And as I like to say, those who won't settle in the life partner market, they're destined to a life of loneliness, or as I like to call it, romantic unemployment. So this is a case where the similarity between the job market and the dating market is really just perfect.
Does that idea apply to ending relationships as well?
That's a really good, timely question. The reason I say it's timely is there's at least anecdotal data, and I've not seen a careful study on this, but there's anecdotal suggestions that a lot of relationships end now around Valentine's Day. People get an idealized notion in their head, and they say, hey, I'm going to end this relationship. I can do better. This Valentine's Day is coming up, and this guy is, you know, we don't have the chemistry I want and so forth. And, you know, I'm not telling anybody to stick with a boyfriend or a girlfriend where it's not going well. Certainly many relationships should end. But the idea that Valentine's Day leads people to have sort of a more idealized notion and to change, to try to move up and be less likely to settle, at least during this brief period, that makes me a little nervous. So I would say take your time. But yes, the exact same logic applies to ending a relationship as it does to when should I settle into this relationship. So search costs are a big issue in the economy as a whole. You know, I could go on all day about examples here, but let me just give you a couple real quickly. The market for search engines is based on search costs because you pay more to be at the top. Why? When you look at a Google search, you're most likely to click on the top link. And if that one doesn't work out, you go to the second link. But a lot of people are satisfied with the first link and they stop their search at that point. So gas stations are a great example. Economists love talking about gas stations. So why do some gas stations charge more than others? Well, what's going on there is some gas stations are willing to just take a chance that lazy customers will just drive in and say, okay, I'll pay whatever because this gas station is here. They give up. Those gas stations are sort of giving up on volume because some people will keep driving till they can get a lower deal, but they get higher profit margins on each customer who does show up. Other stations sort of accept lower margins, but they know they're going to get the high volume customers. So the fact that some people are willing to search more for a good deal leads to this variation in strategy of prices for gas stations. And then the final example I think I'd give for the importance of search costs outside of the job market or the dating context is, again, comes back to age. And so I said older daters should be less picky. There's less time to reap the rewards. But what you see in the data quite clearly is that older people are more picky in other markets. Older shoppers spend more time shopping than younger shoppers. Why is that? Because again, remember, economics is about scarce resources. We optimize based on the resources we have in mind. And so when you're young and you're very busy with your career and you have 2 kids at home that need your attention, you run around, you do your shopping quickly and efficiently. You just say, well, that might cost more than I want to pay, but I'm going to go ahead and do it because I'm in a hurry. I'm not going to drive to the other gas station. I'm not going to drive to the cheaper grocery store. I just have to use my time wisely. But once you're retired, your time constraints change quite a bit. And so what we see is empirically, there's been some nice studies by economists that show quite clearly that empirically you see that older people spend more time shopping than younger people do, and as a result they get better prices. Of course they get better prices because of senior discounts and some of these other things that are just based on differences in willingness to pay, but you see quite clearly in the data they also get better prices because they spend more time searching out better deals because they have more time to go ahead and shop. So basically, I think I should leave it at that. I see we're running out of time. If and these are 4 quick ideas from economics, right? Go big. Be very careful what you say on your job and dating profiles because people are going to make assumptions and fill in anything you left out. Third is figure out a way to signal that you really mean what you say. Try to separate yourself from the fakers. And then finally, I hate to say this, but go ahead and be willing to settle. Settle for less than perfect because you need to move on with your life at some point. And there are a lot of other great ideas from economics that are in the book. I'll show you my book here. It's Valentine's Day. This makes a great stocking stuffer for Valentine's Day for your significant other. And there are a lot of other ideas in the book and in economics that one can take away from this. And I hope I've spurred at least a little bit of interest. Love to have more Twitter followers. You can be my 3rd or 4th Twitter follower if you get on board right now. The book is available on Amazon and elsewhere. And thank you so much for taking the time to join me this morning.
Thank you, Paul. That was really instructive, and I hope everyone enjoyed the combination of the entertaining aspects of finding a personal mate and also the aspects of finding a match in employment. Please be sure to watch Paul on the PBS NewsHour tomorrow evening, February 12th, and he'll be in conversation with business and economics correspondent Paul Salman. And please join us again on March 11th at 10 a.m. Pacific for the next presentation in the Stanford Business Webinar Series. We'll have Professor Yossi Feinberg presenting Driving New Ventures in Established Companies, which will be a look into the challenges of innovations within large organizations. And in the meantime, please visit us online to learn more about the innovative ways that Stanford GSB is changing lives, changing organizations, and changing the world. Thank you.